Hello, and welcome to the PowerTest 24 conference hosted by NETA. I'm Ellen Parson, Editor-in-Chief of EC&M, and today I have Ron Widup with us. He presented a session yesterday, a 3-hour symposium actually, on NFPA 70B. He is the Vice Chairman, Board of Directors, and Senior Advisor of Technical Services for SHRMCO. And he's also the conference chair of PowerTest. So
I am.
Very, very involved here. So I've got the right guy here. Could you start with a little bit of history on NFPA 70B and kind of how it's shifted from a recommended practice to a standard?
Yeah, sure, be glad to. Yeah, it's exciting times for the 70B, if you can have that with an electrical standard. But in the late 60s, they said, hey, we see an issue in industry where we need to look at equipment maintenance because it affects safety and reliability and causes fires, right? Mm-hmm. And so they formed a committee, an ad hoc committee, and the first edition came out in 1973. Mm-hmm. So now fast forward 50 years to 2023, 15 editions later, went from a recommended practice to a standard, and that evolution of time was a lot of things happened during the last 50 years. So.
Definitely, and so you said that was effective January of last year.
Yeah, the way it works, so the 70B is a work practices standard, and so unlike the National Electric Code, there's new editions usually every 3 years. And so with the National Electric Code, if you have an installation, then it's grandfathered in, and so you don't have to do a wholesale change.
Sure.
Well, the 70B, it's a 2023 edition, went into effect, the effective date was January 16th, 2023. So that date is the point at which all these rules apply, and then any previous editions are superseded by that. So January 16th.
That's very important,
It's important, because it helps you to say, here's the rules that we have to apply as of January the 16th. It's like the same thing with NFPA 70E, Standard for Electrical Safety in the Workplace. It has an effective date, and so the 2024 edition was May 13th, 2023 as an effective date. So if there's work practices information in there, it supersedes all your other editions and it goes into effect that date.
Okay, now you mentioned in the presentation 70B and 70E. So can you kind of give the audience just a general overview of how those are interrelated to each other for electrical professionals?
Sure. So NFPA 70, that's a national electrical code, and so that's the mothership.
Right.
And then so 70B, Bravo, is standard for electrical maintenance of electrical equipment.
Right.
Falls under the purview of 70. And then 70E is an Edward, that's the standard for electrical safety in the workplace. So those three documents interrelate to each other, and so author's opinion, but here's why I think there was such a focus on the 70B becoming a standard versus a recommended practice.
Right.
Because if you look at the National Electric Code, it generally has to do with installations and how to do those properly and effectively for safety and protection and all that. But there are a couple of performance-based requirements in 70, the National Electric Code, right? Mm-hmm. So for instance, you have to test ground fault relays. You have to performance test those prior to energization. So there's some things like that. But what's happened is the 70 National Electric Code and 70E, the safety, there's crosstalk between the two because you want safety to be a big part of an electrical installation. The 70E tells you that. Mm-hmm. And keyword is condition of maintenance is a part of 70E. It's also a part of 70. Well, the industry didn't have an enforcement ability for that condition of maintenance and what all that means.
Right.
So if you put safety rules in the 70E relative to condition of maintenance, well, how do you back up what that means? Well, how you back it up is you do it with the 70B, because here's all the stuff you got to do for maintenance, and here's how you do it. Mm-hmm. And so when you tell somebody to work safe and have condition of maintenance be a part of that requirement, refer to the 70B on how to get that done. Okay. So those three, installation, maintenance, and safety, they all kind of talk to each other in sort of a holistic approach. Awesome. So that's why they call it the 3 legs of the stool and different things. Yeah.
Perfect.
So yeah.
All right, well in this session you went over pretty in-depth, obviously, chapter by chapter, discussion of 70B. So do you have any highlights for the viewers?
Yeah, no, those are, of course the whole standard has a lot of important elements, and what happened when we went from a recommended practice to a standard, we, the technical committee, had to rewrite the standard, and so when you're a recommended practice, you say things like, well, you should do this, you may do that, and so it's not mandatory language. Well, a standard has the words, shall and will and all that. And so the 70B had a lot of really good information in it, but it was not mandatory language. And so one of the things that we did was, and we did mention it, but the annex is an important Annex A. And so when we rewrote the standard, we took all this information, wrote the mandatory requirements, but we didn't want to lose this really good information on how to. And so we have an annex called Annex A. And so if there's a particular clause in there that says, you shall do this, and there's an asterisk by it, well, then you go to the annex and you get a lot of narrative about what we're talking about there. And so that was important.
Definitely.
Another big, really important in any standard is the definitions, Chapter 3. And so if you really want to understand a standard, read the definitions, read the words that are a part of that standard, and that really helps you to understand the context and what we're getting at. So Chapter 3 definition is important.
Okay.
Chapter 4, it's called general, but it really has the meat of the standard in that one of the things you want to do with the 70B is establish an electrical maintenance program, EMP.
Okay, right.
So the EMP is the governing body for all the decisions you make relative to the maintenance of the plant. And so if you have a decision to make on medium voltage cable, what tests should we do, when should we do them, and what tests should we apply and all that, well, you do that through the EMP, through a formalized process, and that's talked about in Chapter 4.
Okay.
And then Chapter 8 and Chapter 9 have some of the execution tasks of doing the testing and the requirements and all that. And so a lot of good information in there. You just got to read it and kind of absorb it.
They need to become familiar with all of it, obviously.
Yeah. And then when you go, so the first 10 chapters are sort of general and generic to all things.
Okay.
And then 11 through 38, there's 38 chapters.
Okay.
That's equipment specific. So you'll have a chapter on power circuit breakers, or you have it on medium voltage cables, or so you can get by equipment type the specific task and time and execution by equipment type. And that's what the 70B is all about.
Right, awesome,
Yeah.
okay. I think we're getting close to wrapping up, so do you have any final words of wisdom or just general information for our audience looking to become more familiar with it, gain a deeper understanding of 70B and how to apply those principles in the field?
Well, whether it's the 70B or the 70E, those are minimum requirements, and there's actually no requirement to do any. You don't have to follow any of this stuff, right?
Yeah.
But the key to it all is the authority having jurisdiction, the AHJ, and they'll say what you need to do and how you and whether it applies or doesn't apply. And so the AHJ ultimately is the decision maker on what you do.
Okay.
OSHA is ultimately the ruling body for everything. They have rules that legally you have to follow, right? Well, what OSHA does is say, okay, you had an incident and something happened, and say a safety incident, and so they'll use the 70E as the basis for, here's what we told you to do, and here's the 70E that says, and here's how you should have done it. So they'll use that to support their citations. The 70B, if there's an incident involving maintenance of equipment or some issue, then we think what will happen is OSHA will start to, because now it's a standard, it's a recognized consensus of industry, this is how you should do it, shall do it, and they'll use the 70B for enforcement of their citations.
So
that's
makes
probably
sense.
where it's going to evolve to.
That's where it's going.
And that's where it's going, and as it should be, because it really is, it's a cross-section of industry, we're all agreeing as a consensus standard that this is what you should do, and if you're doing it right, do it the way the 70B says.
Okay, well, I think that's a great place to stop. I think that's it for now. I'm Ellen Parson with EC&M at PowerTest 24 in Dallas. Thank you and have a great day.